antitrust claim against 8 major motion picture Hollywood studios, which I think was the United States versus Paramount, but that's an entirely different thing for another day. But anyway, this antitrust pretty much said that these 8 major motion picture Hollywood studios were in the business of vertical integration, which was monopoly, which was against the law, had really been against the law, since the fall of the Gilded Age and all of the Vanderbilts and the Rockefellers that used vertical integration to make millions and millions and millions. They said that basically you have to get out of the art of exhibition because they were making trashy films that nobody was going to see. The president of the Association of Independent Theater Owners, Harry Brandt, wrote an article that stated, "Wake up, Hollywood producers. Practically all of the major studios are burdened with stars whose public appeal is negligible and receiving tremendous salaries necessitated by contractual obligations. Among those players whose dramatic ability is unquestioned but whose box office draw is nil can be numbered Mae West, Edward Arnold, Greta Garbo, Joan Crawford, and Katharine Hepburn, and many, many others. Garbo, for instance, does not help theater owners in the United States. Kay Francis, still receiving many thousands a week, is now making B pictures. Dietrich, too, is poison at the box office." So Harry Brandt labeled all of these stars as box office poison, and he attempted to find like the solution to the problem, because the fact that these movies were not making money were not all only affecting the motion picture studios. They were affecting these independent theater owners who were not able to make the money off of these pictures they were like at the whims of the Hollywood studios. It's like whatever the Hollywood studios made, they had to distribute them. And if they weren't going to bring in box office, then they were going to be affected too. So it was basically Harry Brandt who was like, this is your problem. It's all of these big stars under contract, and you're giving them too much money. They have no draw at the box office, even if they have some sort of talent, and you're having to build these films around them, like Sylvia Scarlett, to promote their talents, even if they won't bring anything in at the box office. So that affected Katharine Hepburn. So after she got back from Columbia filming Holiday, she was put in another film, Howard Hawks' movie with Cary Grant, called Bringing Up Baby. But that film was not released until like after Katharine Hepburn left her contract at RKO, but it still did not make much money. After she finished filming Bringing Up Baby, she saw like on her production schedule that her next film was going to be a film called Mother Carey's Chickens.
Great title.
I know. Who wouldn't want to make a movie about Mother Carey's chickens? I mean, I'm sure Mother Carey would. Nobody probably asked Mother Carey about how many chickens are there? What are their backstories? What are their names? Do they have love lives? But anyway, she was like, it is time. My career is in full decline. I need to jump ship. So she bought her RKO contract out for $100,000. And she went home to her family's home in Fenwick, Connecticut. Her dad was a doctor, and so they lived in this great big estate in Fenwick, Connecticut. She was also part of like this old wealthy money, just like Tracy Lord. So then she got there in May of 1938, and then at the end of summer of 1938, Philip Barry, who knew Katharine Hepburn, had spent some time at Fenwick, gave her a call and said, "Hey, my career is in decline too." His career had been in decline since the early 1930s because he continued to write about rich people in the Depression, where everybody who went to see his plays was like, this is not relatable whatsoever. Nobody is rich. Well, and he was very successful in the late 20s, throughout the 20s, for his comedies about rich people. So that's really all he knew until, I think it was 1934, his year-and-a-half-old daughter died, and he kind of took a turn for the worst. He started writing very dark avant-garde work that also flopped at the Broadway box office. So in 1938, he called Katharine Hepburn up at the end of the summer 1938. He was like, "Hey, I know your career is on the decline. My career is on the fritz too. Let's get together and create something," as all good artists do.
Yeah.
I think he went to Fenwick. All of the documentaries and the books and the articles that I read, I never quite found out if he went to Fenwick or not. But he pitched her the idea of what would become his last play, called The Second Threshold. And then he pitched her the idea of the Philadelphia Story. And she was like, yes, that one. I can
Yeah.
relate to that one about, a very, very well educated, very wealthy woman who's being bounced around between different men, because that practically was Katharine Hepburn's love life. So they spent the fall of 1938 at his home in Dark Harbor, Maine, writing the Philadelphia story together. And he spent a lot of time with her to make sure that the character of Tracy almost mirrored characteristically that of Katharine Hepburn. Like her speech patterns, her character traits, all of those different things like that. So that, this character of Tracy Lord kind of fit Katharine Hepburn like a glove. So, in March of 1939, the Philadelphia story opened on Broadway to rave reviews and incredible reception from the audience. It ran for over 415 performances. It made over $1 million at the Broadway box office, which at the time was ridiculous. And then it went on a tour where it made over $700,000. And Katharine Hepburn had waived her salary and instead took 10% off of the box office profits and 12.5% off of the touring company's box office profits. Now, just a few interesting things about the Broadway company. Do you know who Van Heflin is? Okay, he was you might have seen him before. He was on Broadway for some time, and then he signed a contract with MGM. He was in movies like Till the Clouds Roll By. He was in some like really big box office hits at MGM. Till the Clouds Roll By, The Three Musketeers. He was in a movie with Ruth Hussey, actually.
Oh.
Tennessee Johnson, where he played Andrew Johnson and Ruth Hussey played his wife. So he was in some really big films at MGM. And then Joseph Cotton. Joseph Cotton was part of the original company of Orson Welles players, like Mercury Theater players. I believe he was part of his company. I don't know if he was one of the original players like Agnes Moorehead was. But he was on Broadway, and then he eventually he was in like David O. Selznick's Since You Went Away with Claudette Colbert. Have you seen that wartime epic? It's Claudette Colbert, Jennifer Jones, Shirley Temple. It's a great movie. You should watch it. He was also in Citizen Kane. And then Shirley Booth, who's wonderful and later had her own television show called Hazel in the 1950s, played Ruth Hussey's role, Liz Embry. And do you know who played Dinah on Broadway? This is what I thought was absolutely amazing.
No, I really don't.
So it was Ann Baxter. Do you know who Ann Baxter is?
Yes. Wait, I'm gonna look her up right now because I know her, but I'm blanking on what she's been in.
Right. Okay. Well, we're gonna sit here in silence in great anticipation until you realize who Anne, I believe, Baxter. Yeah, she was Eva Harrington in All About Eve, and you've seen the Ten Commandments?
Oh gosh, Ben, that was like, that's a blur. That movie.
I know. I had to watch the Ten Commandments with my grandmother over the pandemic, which was great. I love watching movies with my grandmother. But Cecil B. DeMille's direction and his dialogue is just like watching a silent movie with sound. It is so dramatic and presentational. It's kind of like, ugh. But I always knew Ann Baxter because she was like in love with Moses, Charlton Heston, throughout the film. And she was also the wife of Yul Brynner, who was Ramses. So she was Moses, is what she said all the time. And right before she embraced him, she'd go, Moses, and then she'd run her tongue down his throat. Yeah, and she'd part his Red Sea. But anyway, I just thought that was very interesting that Ann Baxter, who was known for other great Hollywood work later, played Dinah on Broadway. Yeah. So anyway, when Katharine Hepburn was writing the Philadelphia story with Philip Barry, she called Howard Hughes, who she had pretty much, she and he had a wild and raucous affair, which we could talk about, but it would take too much time. So in 1938...
Raucous. Just take our word for it.
Yes. Oh, it was. Go watch Aviator. It was awful. But in 1938, while they were writing it, shortly after they had finished it, I think right before it went on like a short tour before it opened on Broadway, she called Howard Hughes and he said, your film career has been on the fritz if you want to, and this is a fantastic role. I think it was part of Howard Hughes knowing that it was a fantastic role, and if it did go to Hollywood, then every actress in Hollywood would want the role of Tracy Lord. He said, buy the film rights and make sure that part of those film rights include your services, which Katharine Hepburn's services would be playing the role of Tracy Lord. So after her tour, she went to, coming back to the Rolls Royce of all Hollywood studios, MGM, she went to Louis B. Mayer, and she said, knowing the worth of her product, she sold the rights to the Philadelphia story to Louis B. Mayer. And she had choice of director George Cukor, who we need to talk about in just a second. She had choice of leading men. She wanted Clark Gable, who was under contract at MGM, and she wanted Spencer Tracy because Clark and Spencer were not available at the time. Her next choice was Cary Grant because she had made like, I think 3 films with him at that point. She loved Cary. He was actually the one that introduced her to Howard Hughes. And so in his contract, it was stipulated that he had to make a salary of $100,000, but he wanted to donate that, which was incredible at the time. He wanted to donate the $100,000 to the British War Relief Fund, because at that time we hadn't entered World War II yet, but Britain was struggling against Germany at that time. So he wanted to give all of his money as like a citizen of Britain. All of his money they made on the Philadelphia story went to the British War Relief Fund. Yes, I know. Isn't that nice? And then you want to talk about Jimmy Stewart also, which we can talk about Jimmy Stewart right now. Are you ready?
Oh, I'm so ready.
Yes. So in 1940, which is really before the time of like when we now as a culture consider Jimmy Stewart to rise to fame with its, starting with It's a Wonderful Life and Vertigo and his time with Hitchcock. Actually, It's a Wonderful Life and Vertigo, now considered classics, flopped at the box office. But starting, I believe, in the early to mid 1930s, Jimmy Stewart had signed a contract with MGM. And in one of the That's Entertainment film, have you seen any of That's Entertainment film?
I've seen some of it, but I have no idea like which one or anything.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Basically, if you haven't seen a That's Entertainment film, there were 3 films made in the 2 of them were made in the 70s, one of them was made in the 90s, and it used MGM stars to host, and they showed clips of different MGM musicals. And Jimmy Stewart had been in one MGM musical with Eleanor Powell, but I think it's Born to Dance, or Broadway Melody of 1936. No, it's Born to Dance. I believe it's Born to Dance. I can't remember. Anyway, he sings in it. But he had a contract with MGM, and he talks about in one of the That's Entertainment films that he was on Broadway. He was a small town boy, I think from Philadelphia. I have notes that I didn't get to type up on him, but he had been on Broadway. He had gone to Princeton. He had ended up on Broadway. And then, when silent films were going out of fashion, talkies were taking over, and all of these great stars with thick accents that nobody could understand were fading away. Every Hollywood studio needed new stars. So he signed a contract with MGM. That's how he ended up there, pretty much, is because he went from Broadway to Hollywood, as we all hope to do one day. So he gets to Hollywood, and he's always kind of like a supporting character, like Ruth Hussey was in 8 Pictures. He made a Thin Man film. He made a very important picture in 1940 called The Mortal Storm. So he'd made several films throughout the 1930s for MGM. And then in 1939, he made Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, which he was nominated for. Yeah, I know. And he was nominated for the Oscar that year, but he lost. But he won for the Philadelphia story. Many have. Yes. Well, he gives an absolutely wonderful performance in both films, in my opinion. But many have speculated. What?
I said I agree.
Yeah. Yes. And he pushed himself as an actor also. Many have speculated that the 1940 Oscar that he got for Philadelphia Story was like a consolation prize because he didn't win for Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, but I think he deserved the Oscar for Philadelphia Story.
Well, I was curious who else was in the running for that, because it really I just didn't expect him to receive a Best Actor award for this film.
Right. Well, and out of all of his performances, it's this is
great.
the one that won.
Yeah, it's just kind of surprising.
Okay, winners and nominees. So for that year, he was up against Charles Chaplin in The Great Dictator. He was up against Henry Fonda in The Grapes of Wrath. He was up against Raymond Massey in Abe Lincoln in Illinois, and he was up against Laurence Olivier in Rebecca. So he was up against some